Okay, we're recording. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second in our local author interviews. Today we are very, very lucky to have Mark Scott with us. He's an author from Horwich who has come along to tell us all about his book, Beyond the Witch's Circle, and some of the background to the book, where he came up, how he came up with his ideas. I do know that Mark is really passionate about this novel, and this should appeal to people who are book lovers, and also people who are very interested in family history as well. So thank you, Mark, for coming along. We really do appreciate it. Yeah, it's fantastic of you to give your time this afternoon. So before you start, would you like to give people perhaps a little bit of information about yourself, a bit of background to you?
Well, what can I say? Yeah, I'm a retired university academic manager. I used to work at Blackburn University Centre, and prior to that, for 30 years nearly, I worked at the University of Bolton. So we lived in Bolton quite a few years. And I'm not a historian or anything similar by background. I'm actually a physicist. But I'm retired now and making mischief of myself. I'm a member of Bolton Mountain Rescue Team, which keeps me busy.
Yes,
and
yeah,
so that's
fantastic. So you've got a lot. You've got a lot on. So you're a very busy man. We're very lucky to have you this afternoon.
Did you hear that? That was the call-out message. I better turn that off. Fortunately, they know I'm not available. Yes, so I can explain how it was that I came to be the writer of this historical novel, and that's what the lecture's about, really.
Yes, because I was just going to mention that you were doing. I don't want to give the game away, but you were doing a bit of family research, weren't you? And you came across this amazing, very intriguing mystery, which formed the background to your novel.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to give any spoilers, so I shall hand over to you, and look forward to hearing all about it this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks again for inviting me. Oh, here we go. It's a bit of a surprise, really, that I ever got to be writing the book, which is this book here, Beyond the Witch's Circle. I've always felt that there was a book inside me that wanted to get out, but couldn't find a title. And then I was doing a bit of fairly ordinary family history research, and this amazing story just hit me square between the eyes when I discovered a link between my poor farming and mining family living up in Geordieland, and one of history's most famous women, Josephine Elizabeth Butler. So it went from being, ordinary to extraordinary. And I realized that, hey, I've got to write a book about this. So I'll try and give you some idea of how this happened. I'll start off, if this works, by showing a little video as a backdrop to me reading an abridged version of the first chapter of the book. So the video should play in the background while I'm reading it. We'll see how it goes.
Fantastic. I'm sure it'll be fine. It'll be wonderful.
Here's the video, hopefully. I've tried to make it look like it was taken in Victorian times.
It looks fantastic, actually. It looks really good.
By adding a few effects.
Yeah.
So this is reading from chapter 1 of Beyond the Witch's Circle. Just turn the music sound down a bit. A woman stood alone on ancient Corbridge Bridge in the dark quiet of early Sunday morning, both her hands on the cold stone parapet. She was looking vacantly at the river below. It was 5 o'clock. She'd been in the vicinity since just after midnight, all night. It was the 19th of October, 1856. This was to be her last day. She returned for the third time in as many hours to the spot where the water below seemed deepest. Twice before, she had retreated from this place. She knew that to take her own life was a sin. How much greater would be her sin if she jumped with a baby beside her? What else was there for the two of them? Once again, she climbed onto the parapet and allowed her legs to dangle over the drop. She looked down once again at the black water below. Recent rains had swelled the river so that it was in spate, flowing deep and strong and churning menacingly. It was blacker than anything she'd ever seen before, and yet it was marbled through with silver veins, forever moving, chasing here and there, a sparkling vision of sinister and deadly beauty formed by the reflection of the bright young crescent moon on the Tyne's chaotic current. All she had to do was shift her weight forward just a little, a few inches, and it would be done. Then her thoughts, churning like the water she faced, returned to the thing that had brought her here in the first place. The innocent within her and the appalling prospect of it losing all of its chances, its whole future, at a stroke of her utter selfishness. She did not shift her weight forward. Instead, she looked at the sky to the east. It was starting to lighten. Birds had started to sing. A new day, a Sunday, was dawning. Let it be a new day for her and for her baby. This answer was not today.
It's fascinating.
That's the beginning of the chapter in which Jane Scott is in a desperate situation, and it's about finding out what happened to her. Now, this photograph that you see here is on the right is my great-grandfather Walter Scott. A bit chubby there compared to his brother Ernest, who's a little bit younger than he is, and they're from Blaydon in the northeast, which is very close to Newcastle, right up against the River Tyne up there. And he's ready. They're both ready to go. They're both ready to go to war. Unfortunately, Ernest, the younger one, he was killed in Flanders Fields near Ypres on the 15th of May 1915. And he's buried in the war graves at Boulogne-sur-Mer. He was killed right alongside Walter. Walter, unfortunately, saw his brother blown to pieces, and that affected him for the rest of his life. Yeah. I know this because I spoke to his Walter's daughter, my great aunt Marion, who died recently, aged 104. Which is pretty good going, and she was amazing. One of my favourite people. Yeah. Yeah. This is the medal that Walter came back with. You got the standard war medals, the first three from the left. The one on the right, can you see my pointer moving?
Yes.
Yeah, that one there is the Belgian Croix de Guerre, the war medal, military cross, and he got that for bravery in the field, an act of individual bravery, an act of individual feat of arms. So that was quite unusual, and he was mentioned in dispatches. So he did all right for himself, although he lost his brother in that conflict. Yeah. When he came back from the war, he was living in Bishop Auckland, and he started working in this factory as the general manager of this factory. Now, this is the Shaw and Knight factory in Bishop Auckland, up there in Geordieland. And he was the general manager. The factory made, well, the polite way of saying it is sanitary earthenware, by which we usually mean basins, baths, but also urinals. So there's definitely a urinal connection in our family. The characters bottom right are William Henry Knight and Andrew Shaw, who actually own the factory that makes these sinks and baths and basins and urinals. And it turns out that Walter is the nephew of Andrew Shaw. So it's a bit of keep it in the family. When Walter came back from the war, he probably went to Andrew Shaw and said, you know, this factory you've got in Bishop Auckland, how about me working there? And clearly they did. He did, so he gave him a job there. This is the stuff they made, the sinks there, and yeah, a couple of urinals, just to show the kind of the wares that they had. And here they're making baths. This shows the baths in 1929. Now then, in 1922, they were 26 shillings, so £27, 17 shillings and sixpence for the one that you can see in the foreground, which is an A quality model. If you go on the Bank of England website, you'll find there's a calculator to work out what that's worth in present day money, taking into account inflation. And in fact, it works out at £1,285.
Yeah.
Over £1,000.
Well. They're enormous baths, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm not surprised, with the weight of it, but it's £1,200 for that bath.
Mm.
So it wasn't a cheap item. And here, there's nothing like getting your arm right down the U-bend. This is actually in the factory at Bishop Auckland, where my great granddad was in charge. An interesting side story to this is that once Walter became the general manager, he employed his own son, Jim, who was my granddad, to work as a sort of a foreman. And he was terrible. The men were up in arms against my granddad, Jim. And in the end, Walter had to sack his own son. His son was so miffed at the fact that his own father had sacked him from his job that he, his wife, and his children, including my dad, all went off to Coventry. And rather bad choice of timing, because just as they arrived in Coventry, the Blitz on Coventry began, and they were there for the middle of the Blitz. And that story is part of the story that is dealt with in this book here, The King Cried for Coventry, which the story itself precedes Beyond the Witch's Circle, although it was actually published afterwards. Also, interestingly, when they realised that Coventry wasn't a very good place to be because of all the bombs coming down and people getting killed, they decided to go back to the northeast. Instead of going to Bishop Auckland, they went to Whitley Bay, or as they call it up there, Whitley Mere. And just as they arrived in Whitley Bay, the Whitley Bay bombings began. I kid you not.
That's terrible. That's terrible timing.
It is terrible timing, yeah. So that's a little backstory, anyway.
Yeah.
This just shows you the relationships. There's Walter. Whoops, go back. There's Walter, my great granddad, the one who got the medal and who's lost his brother. His dad was Henry Scott, and his mum was Elizabeth Jane Balance before she got married. And there is Andrew Shaw, who married Elizabeth's sister Isabella. So that's how Walter is a nephew of Andrew Shaw. That shows the relationship there. But it also shows that Walter's dad was Henry Scott, who married Elizabeth Jane Balance. Elizabeth Jane Balance was 7 years younger than Henry. This is a coal mine. It's called the Lily Drift Mine, and you've got 13 inches from top to bottom to have to crawl through to get the coal and also the fire clay that they get out of the mine in Bishop Auckland. And the reason this is important, because that's why the factory exists, because in order to make urinals and sinks and basins, you need two things. You need coal for the furnaces, but you also need clay. And this mine is a horizontal seam of coal and fire clay, 13 inches high, with a bit of fire clay on top that goes into the hillside in Bishop Auckland.
Yeah.
And it's because that exists and the terrible conditions that they had to mine in it, that's the reason that the factory exists.
Yeah.
Use the materials. Now, thinking about Horwich and Bolton, can you think of anywhere in our area where coal and fire clay exist in a seam going into a hillside?
I wouldn't be surprised if there was some over on Burnt Edge somewhere.
Burnt Edge, that's a very good answer. In fact,
is it?
Yeah, if you look up above Horwich, there are old mine workings, and they go into towards Burnt Edge and up towards Winter Hill. And in fact, there is a seam in Horwich, which is a yard high, they called it then, a yard high with a certain amount of fire clay sitting on top of it, and it starts just above where I live and goes into the hillside near Wilderswood, George's Lane around there, and goes in under Winter Hill. And that was mined back in Victorian times.
Right.
So guess what we had in Horwich in those days? Well, we had the pipe works that my house sits on now, as I'm speaking to you now,
Oh,
from
yeah.
from up the hill in Horwich. They used to make pipes in what they used to call the Klondike. And in order to make pipes, earthenware pipes, you need coal and clay. But also, there's a bit more to it than that. If I look at this census record, I decided to look into the owner of the factory in Bishop Auckland, find out some more about him. His name was Andrew Shaw. He was the uncle of my great-grandfather, as mentioned. So here's a record from the census, 1911 census. And if we home in on a bit more closely, you can see Andrew Shaw with his wife, Isabella, who was, as I mentioned before, the sister of Elizabeth. And there's the children, Richie Shaw and so on. And it's all pretty much as you would expect. He's being described as working in sanitary fire clay works and so on. Yeah, everything is as you would expect. Now be prepared for a shock, because when you look at the bottom of that sheet,
I'll have to come a bit closer, sorry.
When you look at the bottom of that sheet, you see this, Andrew Shaw.
Oh, yes.
224 Lee Lane, Horwich. I nearly fell off the chair when I saw this. Good grief, this is, I mean, that's just the bottom of my road. I go past it every day. Lee Lane, Horwich. Why is this? Well, this is 224 Lee Lane, Horwich.
I was going to say, where is that in Lee?
Just to the right is the Crown, the pub called the Crown at the bottom of Crown Lane. Okay. So it's right, you can see the car park of the Crown there.
Yeah.
And there's my car there. Can you see with the Mountain Rescue sticker?
Yeah.
So my great-granddad's uncle, who owned this factory, he lived there. What was he doing there, living there? And also it said he was doing sanitary enamelware in Horwich. Well, here it is. It was the pickle factory in Horwich. Here it is. It was behind what we now have as Aldi, the supermarket. It was an enamel sanitary ware factory that made, yep, you guessed it, basins, baths, and urinals and so on. And look at the phone number at the top. Can you see it? Horwich 2.
Oh, yes, yes.
That's it. That is the number.
I was looking for a number there.
Have you ever seen a phone number that's just one number? You see, the thing is, people in Horwich, they have trouble remembering numbers. Well, sorry, people in Horwich, not true. I'm only kidding. So there you go, the shortest number, and they make the same sort of stuff. So what's going on here? Just skip that for a second. What must have happened is that William Henry Knight and Andrew Shaw must have learned their trade, as it were, as managers. They didn't own the factory in Horwich; they were managers, and they thought, well, we can do this for ourselves. And they got up to Bishop Auckland and set up their own factory, because there's coal and there's fire clay in Bishop Auckland. So they went and did the same thing and decided to work for themselves, as it were, instead of working for Mr. W.R. Pickup Limited. Yeah. And that's how the connection between Horwich and my northeastern family occurs. So going back up to near Newcastle, just southwest of Newcastle is Blaydon. There's the River Tyne, and you can see the A1 running up there, just going by Blaydon. That's what it looks like now on the Ordnance Survey map. This is what it looks like in the mid 19th century Victorian times. There is no A1, as you won't be surprised to hear. But there it is. You've got Blaydon, the River Tyne, and to the southwest of Blaydon, you've got Win Leighton, which is up on the hill. You can see the way they represent the hill there. Win Leighton is indeed up on the hill above Blaydon. And if you look carefully, just down here, there's Win Leighton. There's a smithy there, which is where one of my ancestors used to work. And there's a little patch here, just by the H of Hag Hill.
Yeah.
That's, just to give the game away a little bit, that little patch of woodland there, that is the Witch's Circle.
Oh, right.
Of Beyond the Witch's Circle fame. This is Blaydon in the mid 19th century. Look how old that locomotive is. Astonishing, beautiful, amazing photograph. One of the first ever photographs of its type, that. So I started to look into, well, what about Walter's dad? And I found out that Walter's dad, Henry worked in the sort of 1880s and 90s in, you guessed it, sanitary fly clay works. This time not in Horwich, not in Bishop Auckland, but in Blaydon, where we've just seen the map.
Yeah.
So talk about keeping it in the family. Henry was doing it before Walter ever did it. So this became, you know, a point of discovery, and I decided to look into Henry Scott. There's the Harriman's factory doing the same kind of things as they did in Horwich and in Bishop Auckland. And I've just got that photograph in because I think it's lovely. 1903 with the horse and car. Yeah, it's a fantastic old photograph. Yeah. So I looked at the census for this is the census for 1881, and I'll be zooming in a second, so don't worry. But on it, you'll see, I'll zoom in a sec, but you could just about make out there, Henry Scott. Yes. At Anne Valens. And if I just zoom into that, you can see that Anne Valens was the head of the household, so she lost her husband. She's 73 years old and she's a widow. And then there's Henry Scott, and he's a boarder, so he's moved from somewhere. Yeah. And he's unmarried, 23-year-old, and he's got quite a good job actually. He's a clerk to the railway, so that's pretty good. So he's boarding, and he's got a job as a clerk to the railway. So started to look a little bit further back, and this is the 61 census. Let me just get my notes up to the same speed. The 61 census. And now in this, you can make out that Henry is 3 years old. And this is his family. They're living in a place called Shorewell House. Yeah. And there's William. He's the head of the household. And Hannah, his wife. Then there's these people here, Charlton, Hannah, Margaret. I can't even read that, Thomas. And then here's Henry. And he's grandson. So he's a grandson of William. Where's Mum? That's odd. He's 3 years old. So he's born about 1858, and he's, you know, he's got no job because he's a child, he's a baby. And he was born in Northumberland, Dilston. Well, I'd never heard of Dilston. I don't know if you've ever heard.
No.
No, I'd never heard of Dilston. So first, two things hit me in the face. First of all, where's Dilston and why was he born there? And secondly, where's his mum and dad? Because they're not there. So I went to the 1871 census, and I'll zoom in on that. I love the old handwriting that you get. It takes a while to get your eye tuned onto this old-fashioned writing, but it does. You do get there gradually. And this is the 1871 census, and so 10 years later. So Henry would have been 13 now. Yeah. And here's William and Hannah, the heads of the household. All the other sort of young ones have moved on to their own jobs, but Margaret is still there. She's the daughter of William and Hannah, and she's unmarried, and she's 23, and she's an agricultural labourer. And then Henry, grandson still, no mum, no dad. He's 13. He's at school, and he's born in Corbridge, which is where Dilston is. Yeah. So where's mum? Where's dad? Because this mum and dad of Henry, these are my ancestors. I need to know where they are. The first thing was, where is this Shorewell House where Margaret and a lot of them are all agricultural labourers? Well, it's near the Roman Hadrian's Wall. It's just south of Hadrian's Wall, between the River Tyne and Hadrian's Wall. The road runs up there, and Shorewell House is a farm there. And next to Shorewell House, which was a farm, it's now a business centre, is Stagshaw Parsonage. It's still there, Stagshaw Parsonage, as is Shorewell House, and I visited these places. And Stagshaw Parsonage and Shorewell House both play an important part in my book. Right. This is Shorewell House. I visited it to find out, as part of my research. Yeah. It's a nice place. And the guy who owns it came out and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind." I'm doing some research for my family tree, and one of my ancestors was born in this house. Oh, he said, that's interesting. Come in.
Oh,
So he took me into this, and I can't tell you how moving it was to be in the actual house
yeah.
where my great grandfather was brought up from the age of about 1
Mm.
up until, he left for Bladen, and when he was 20, whatever it was. It was really strange feeling that came across me as he showed me all the rooms, every single room in this wonderful old house. And there's the parsonage that you saw on the map. There it
In the
is,
distance, yeah.
which plays an important part in the book.
And
So,
was it modern inside, or was it still quite?
yes and no. They've done it very tastefully, actually. So it looked like an old farmhouse, but it wasn't falling to bits. It was, the plaster was in very good condition, and it was also comfortable and warm with a lovely, wood fire and everything. I wanted to live there, actually. But
what a shame
sadly, I can't. And it was a really nice guy, and he said, as soon as you've written that book, you've got to send me a copy. So I did.
Yes, yeah.
So I thought, well, why was Henry born, in Dilston, wherever that was, and then ends up when he's 3 living in that farm? I eventually managed to track down his birth certificate, and here it shows some key things. He was born in 1867. He was 57. He's a boy, obviously. Oh, this is interesting. Look, father. No father. Well, that wasn't so unusual in those days. The other interesting thing is, Mum signed with a cross, so she's illiterate.
Yeah.
She's illiterate, and also her name is Jane Scott. I'd never heard of a Jane Scott. There's no Jane Scott at Shorewell House Farm. There's no Jane Scott anywhere. Who is this Jane Scott?
Yeah.
So mystery was getting a bit intriguing. That zooms in on the same thing, and you can see there's no dad, and there's Jane Scott. And the registrar was James Fairlamb, and it was registered in Hexham. So in my book, there's a scene in which a vicar who's acting on behalf of Henry meets James Fairlamb, and they have a glass of whiskey together as James goes through his records to find this very document. Yeah. So I kept the story very, very accurate historically. Now, I then sort of think, well, where's Dilston? And it turns out to be just on the other side of the River Tyne. You go up a hill, and there's a castle. In fact, all there is the castle, a little farm, which is an important spot in the book, and Dilston Hall. And the only place really he could have been living, I later discovered, was Dilston Hall.
Yeah.
So he was almost certainly born, Henry, in Dilston Hall, which is a very strange thing because Dilston Hall is a flipping mansion.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Now you've obviously got, some people very well off.
Yeah, but think about it. Jane was an illiterate, unmarried mother.
Exactly.
From Corbridge.
Yeah.
And Henry, her son, was no dad, and was born in what is in effect a mansion.
Yes, it doesn't make sense, does it? Yeah.
This is in their wartime, First World War time, and I even got hold of a map of the layout of the rooms. So it's like it's like Cluedo, isn't it? Drawing room.
I'm just going to say that, is it Cluedo?
The library. All you need is some lead piping and
you do.
And what else they use in that game? You've got the whole game. And of course, I used this map in the book when I was describing the goings on. I won't go into any detail, but I used this map because it was perfect. I could talk about the actual places and rooms and so on. So it's all very well. There's a building there, and it's obviously a posh building, and Henry was born there. But who else lived there? Which brought me to John Gray. This is John Gray. What a fine-looking man. And he is the cousin, it turns out, of Earl Grey.
The Earl Grey.
The Earl Grey of tea fame. Earl Grey was the Prime Minister who, as well as being famous for liking a tea that's named after him, he also abolished slavery, which is just a little thing. So he's quite a character. And he was a Christian libertarian type chappie, and he brought up his children to be the same, free thinking, very, very devoted Christian, but actually anti-establishment Christian. So they were actually a bit suspicious of the established church. They were more like sort of the Methodist and similar unorthodox persuasion.
Right.
And he's a fascinating character. And this is his daughter, she was born Josephine Elizabeth Gray. She married Reverend George Butler, I discovered, who was from Oxford. And she turns out to be one of history's most famous women. So, now what's going on here? And by the way, the T-shirt I'm wearing, that's her.
Yes, there she
This is her, Josephine Elizabeth Butler. So you can guess she's quite important.
Yeah.
So I started to read about John Gray, her father, and Josephine Elizabeth Butler, who was born Josephine Elizabeth Gray. And I devoured anything I could, because I just felt there must be a link between her and my Henry, my ancestor. Here's another picture of Josephine. She was, according to a newspaper article at the time, she was considered one of the most beautiful women in existence at the time. She was, she was revered amongst the high and mighty. She was very aristocratic, as was her father. They were very well to do, as you can imagine, being cousin of the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And here's, I went to the Liverpool Museum, and here's a bust of her in there. She's actually on show there in the museum.
That's amazing.
So the thing that made it all possible to actually research her was because she's so famous. There's a lot of information. In particular, she wrote this book. She wrote this book about her father, and it's a proper book, and it's available online for free. It's published in 1874, as you can see. So it's her talking all about her father. So you learn a lot about her father, and I portray her father in the book very accurately, therefore, because I've got all this information. But also because there's a lot of letters between her and her father in the book, you learn a lot about Josephine Elizabeth Butler as well. So that was a vital.
How she speaks as well.
Exactly, exactly, and the way she ticks, her inner thoughts.
Yeah.
So I use those in the book. She also wrote a book about, her husband George Butler, when he died, which of course contains even more personal letters and correspondence between her and George. That gives you an even deeper insight into the nature of her as a person. So it was absolutely a goldmine, these books. And the more I read about Josephine Butler, the more I became overwhelmed by her as a person, an absolutely towering character. And if anybody's in any doubt of this now, maybe you've never heard of Josephine Elizabeth Butler, but she was voted recently the 19th most influential woman in the whole of human history.
Wow.
By BBC History magazine.
Where was that? I was going to ask you where that was.
So it's an authoritative source. That it's not just some Mickey Mouse thing. So a lot of people have not heard about her, but she was responsible for some huge social reforms. Even when women had no power, she was able to wield power, and she took massive risks in pursuing all sorts of important causes, primarily about the rights of women and children. That's what she was about fundamentally, and that's very important to my story. So she's a brilliant character, and here she is. She's died now. This is 1911 or something, and this is her friends writing. They call it an autobiographical memoir about her. Now she's died, and once again, a huge source of information. So in my book, when I write about Josephine Elizabeth Butler, I'm writing from a firm foundation. I'm You know,
Yeah.
I'm not short of information about what kind of person she is.
Mm.
And there's the book that I wrote, but I've still not explained how it is that she is linked to Henry, because she's not
No.
Henry's mum.
No.
So how is it? Well, it turns out that Josephine Elizabeth Butler, from an age of early 20s, she was known for rescuing destitute women,
Okay.
especially prostitutes.
Right.
That was her thing from an early age. She
Mm.
took them in, she gave them jobs as servants.
Oh.
She was the only person daring to do that. Some people said she was disgusting because she was you know, mixing with these low life, as they saw it, low life women. But she said that God was, you know, wanting her to do this work because they were God's creatures and so on.
Mm.
She was very devout Christian, and so she rescued just destitute women, especially prostitutes. So that's the first clue as to what's going on.
Mm. Yeah.
I also started to look about the kind of social situation that occurred at the time. And there was a thing called the 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act. Now, I won't go into detail, but let me just say that if you were an unmarried woman and you were having a baby in those days, your plight was desperate, because prior to the 1834 Act, the parish was responsible under the Elizabethan Poor Laws. The parish was responsible for looking after you, giving you an allowance. And so it really mattered which parish you were in. That's why they kept very detailed parish records, because you were going to, you know, nobody wanted to pay for a burdensome woman unless they absolutely had to.
Yeah.
So it was the Elizabethan Poor Laws that gave money to destitute women who had a child. And the equivalent of conservatives at the time regarded this as a bad thing, because they said it made poor law assistance almost as good as having a husband. You didn't need a husband. You just had the baby, and then the state, what we now call the state, it was the parish, would give you this money and you're all sorted, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And they said it was encouraging bad behavior amongst both men and women, that they wouldn't think of the consequences of, you know, behaving badly. And so the government decided to bring in a new act which made women solely responsible, not the parish, but the women themselves responsible for the child. And if they could find the husband, then he also would be responsible. But because in those days they had no DNA tests, all the husband had to say, all the man had to say, not husband, all the man had to say was, they want me. And who's to argue against that? Because they've got no evidence. There's no way of showing it. And so they decided that the woman would be responsible. Now, if you think about it, if you're a poor woman and you're not married and you're having a baby, especially in the case of this, which turns out to be you're having a baby by a married man, then your family will throw you out.
Yeah.
Your employer will throw you out. Your only hope would be the workhouse, but many workhouses wouldn't take women who were in this particular circumstance because they thought it was too sinful. So your only hope was twofold. One, you could become a prostitute, or two, you could get rid of your baby. And there was a third possibility. And another possibility was you just kill yourself.
Well, yeah.
You know, and that's
I wasn't thinking down those lines, but yeah.
A lot did, you know, and that's why the beginning of the book, I read it to you about her, you know, standing on the bridge with a baby. She's got a baby inside her, and she's agonizing over what to do, because that was the plight faced by many women in those times. And another option I discovered by reading newspapers and also reading books was something called baby farming. Now, very few people have heard of baby farming, but what used to happen was they used to put adverts like this. This one is an actual advert from an actual newspaper of the time. And they used to put them in the newspapers that would be read by women, such as seamstresses and housemaids. And it made it look like there was a way out there's this advertiser is a widow with a little family of her own, and she's got a little allowance from her husband, and she'd be prepared to accept a young child, to adopt it if for 15 shillings a month, and also could adopt it entirely if they're under 2 months old. And it sounds like this is a way out, except that 15 shillings is almost as much as you would earn at that time doing those jobs. So it sounds like, and many women believe that this was a way of solving their problem. I'll take my baby to these. They didn't call themselves baby farmers, but we now call them that. And they will look after her or him, and then I'll be able to carry on doing a job of some kind, and I'll learn as much as I can to pay for the childcare in effect. Except it wasn't that at all. That's not what it was about. This is Margaret Waters. She was a baby farmer, and she's doing what they all did. She's murdering babies.
Oh gosh.
They used to take in the babies, and they used to maltreat them. And instead of feeding them milk, they would feed them with what's called quicklime, which is what they used to make cement with. And it slowly kills them. And if they cried, they'd give them something called laudanum, which we now call morphine. And morphine would shut them up. And eventually they'd fade away, they'd register the birth, and they would die. They would die and register the death. In some cases, they would simply kill them. And like this woman here, hide them away. And what they discovered was that not just in the Tyneside area, but all over the country, they were finding these little babies, bodies of little babies, wrapped in newspaper alongside each other. And for a long time, they couldn't work out what's going on. They also found them floating in the River Tyne, in the Thames, in the Trent, bodies of babies floating. And first of all, they thought it was the women that were doing it. They were disposing of their own babies. But when they discovered that babies wrapped in newspaper were found lying, different babies obviously from different families, were found lying in the same spot, they started to get suspicious. And eventually they realized, and this book explains all about it, written in 1869. I won't go into details, but it's an absolutely brilliant book, explains it all. What was happening was these adverts were enticing women to give their babies away. They were taking the 15 shillings per month, and then they were taking the babies and killing them. And this was happening on an industrial scale for profit. There's this old book explaining about the background, and there's baby farming, chapter 3. Fantastic book.
Can't believe that.
Here's Amelia Dyer. She was a baby farmer, and she murdered babies for many, many years, up until 1896. If you think about who is Britain's most prolific serial killer, who would you say?
One of the Fred West films, or I suppose the other one. What's it called? The chap. Harold Shipman.
Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman, is regarded as Britain's most prolific serial killer. I forget the numbers, but I think was it 140, something like that. He's not Britain's most prolific serial killer. Amelia Dyer is. She killed 300 babies. She was a baby farmer, and she killed 300 babies. There's an article in the Independent, and she was eventually. They began to realise that, what's going on. They kept finding all these children's bodies. What's going on? They couldn't accept that it was being done, deliberately. Eventually, until they had a royal inquiry, and all these top physicians and detectives and so on started to investigate, and they realised that it was actually having an effect on the demographics, the population. You could see a dip in the population amongst the working class, and it was because of these baby farmers, not just in Newcastle but across the country. It was a huge scandal, and yet nowadays nobody knows about it.
No,
and we don't teach it in school. It's probably the darkest moment in our history as a nation. And
And
yet,
it's only 100 years ago. I mean,
it's only 100 years ago. It's incredible, isn't it?
yeah.
So what's the connection still between Henry, who was born in Dilston, where Josephine Elizabeth Butler lived and was an aristocratic woman who saved prostitutes, and Jane Scott? Well, I discovered that Jane Scott was must have, working out from what stage of pregnancy she was at, she must have been in Corbridge just at the time when Elizabeth and her husband George were. George was the vicar at St Andrew's Corbridge Church. And ordinarily, he would live down south, but he was asked by the vicar of Corbridge Church, would he do a few months stint there? And that would be Jane's church.
Yeah.
So Jane and her church, she's having a baby. She's lost, she's got this terrible situation. Josephine Butler, whose business is and always has been rescuing destitute women, is in the same place at the same time. And where does Jane end up going to have her baby, Henry? In Dilston House, where Josephine Butler, her dad, lives. So that explains the link. Josephine Butler must have rescued my ancestor Jane.
Yeah.
That's how the story came about. This is the church, lovely church at Corbridge St Andrew's Church, where Josephine and George particularly was the vicar. This is where they must have met, because this is inside the church. George, just for those few months, that little window, was the vicar of this church just at the time when Jane was in her desperate situation, and Jane must have connected with Josephine Butler and must have taken Jane to Dilston, to the posh mansion, and must have allowed her to stay there and be a housemaid or something similar.
Yeah.
So there's the link. Henry, when he grew up, he moved to Blaydon when he was 23, I think it was. And there's the church in St Cuthbert's Church in Blaydon, which plays an important part in the book. There's Blaydon, a wonderful old photograph.
It's a very pretty place.
And in the book, Henry falls in love with Elizabeth Jane Ballance, who you saw on the family tree. She's 7 years younger than him, so there's a bit of scandal about the fact that he's 23 and she's not. She's only barely 16, and they want to get married, but they can't because the father says, number one, she's too young, and number two, who are you, Henry Scott? We don't know anything about your mother. We don't know anything about your father.
Yeah.
So who's she marrying into? I'm sorry, son. It's not going to happen, basically, is what it amounts to. And so Henry needs to find out about his parents because he doesn't know himself. And the vicar of St Cuthbert's in Blaydon takes up his problem and goes to Hexham. That's where he has the whiskey with the registrar and so on. And the story sort of unfolds like that. So it's all about Henry and Lizzie Jane and their love affair, despite people trying to prevent it. Love will flourish, as you know, and also how they eventually managed to solve the problem of who Henry's parents were. So that's the idea behind the book, and it's amazing. It uses all the old sort of accurate information, like maps such as this. This is Hexham. We've just seen the Abbey there, Hexham Abbey. Yeah. The registry office is there, and the Railway Tavern at Hexham is a place close to my heart because I had to make quite a lot of trips up there in order to research the book. And what's called the Railway Tavern now is now the Station Inn, and it's an original building surrounded by a lack of original building, so it just sits there like an island. Yeah. And they do bed and breakfast for £36 a night. And it's a marvelous place, and the breakfast is to die for, absolutely gorgeous, and it's just £36 a night, which is just
that's very, very good.
So I stayed there on 2 separate occasions while I was doing the research, and I had to write it into the book as well because it's such a great place.
You have to do, yes.
So it's in the book. This is the registrar's office as it looks now. That's where, you know, the vicar discovers Jane's, Henry's birth record. And that's the same place as it looks now from the back. There's one of the chapters where the Reverend stays in the railway tavern, which you've just seen from the book. This is where, just up from the railway tavern, a place called Hollow Meadows, there's an actual chapter called Hollow Meadows, and this is where it's based. And now you can see it's a kitchen and bathroom place. Yeah. So it's all accurately done. That's why that's proof that it's called Hollow Meadows. Yeah. This is back in Blaydon in the 60s. This will be.
That's a nice street.
No, and it's, look how steep it is.
I know, it's like that. I was going to say it's a bit like a Horwich, isn't it?
Yes, it is like the Horwich advert. Yeah, I've walked up that street, and it's in the book as well. Henry and Lizzie Jane walk up there. It's incredibly steep. It's like really hard work. So I needed Henry and Lizzie Jane to get together, and I knew from the fact that they were living, that Lizzie Jane was living with her, I think it was 7 sisters. There's no way Henry and Lizzie Jane were going to get it together in Lizzie Jane's house, because there were 6 children and mum and dad in there. And like many conceptions in those days, they happened outdoors, because where else could you get together? Yeah. So I needed an outdoor venue for 2 crucial scenes in the book. And there's a place here which is known by the local Winleighton people as the Witches' Circle.
Oh, it's there. I was looking up at near the quarry. Yeah. I was thinking it was near the quarry at first.
No, we're up in Winleighton now. The Witches' Circle is that little bunch of trees there. And there used to be inside that bunch of trees a stone slab with a depression in the middle. And legend had it that witches used to do their sacrifices there. Yeah. And there are actually, if you go online, you can find them. There are legends about the witches of Winleighton. So I thought, well, that would be a really nice, interesting place to have them get together. So I used the venue. And my wife, I was looking around for a title of the book, and my wife said, what are you going to call the book? And I said, I was thinking of calling it Saving Henry. And she didn't like that really. And anyway, somebody else had used Saving Henry. So she said, why don't you call it Beyond the Witches' Circle? Because she knew about the Witches' Circle. So I thought, I quite like that. So I used that. Trouble is, it's got me into trouble, because some people think it's going to be about witches, which it really isn't, you know.
I must admit, when I first heard the title, I thought there were going to be witches in it as well.
They do get a mention, to be fair, but you know, it's not about witches. It's not at all.
Well, it's beyond, isn't it?
Yeah. This is a satellite photograph of that area. So you've got Winleighton top left, Winleighton Mill bottom right. It's a hill that goes down from Winleighton to Winleighton Mill, going downhill, and there's the Witches' Circle. And if you look carefully, you can see that diagonal path there. Yeah, that's still there, and I've walked down it. And what you do is you walk down that. It's just a very faint path. You walk across here, you go over a gate there, and then you're into the field that contains the Witches' Circle. And that is, believe it or not, that is the Witches' Circle. I had to trespass to take that photograph. So I kept my eyes open for the farmer, because apparently the farmers get really narked when people go and try and, you know, go
and
down.
Are the horses or cows? Can I see a cow in the background as well? You have to dash through a field of cows.
Yes,
as well.
There are cows. Yeah, and inside the Witches' Circle itself, there are indeed horses. So this was taken inside the Witches' Circle, and there used to be this stone slab on the ground with a depression in the middle, a stone of sacrifice. But the farmer got so annoyed with people coming to see it and use it, you know, pagan stuff. Yeah. He had it taken away.
And sit off.
I'd love to have that in my garden, actually. I really would.
Oh, that might be your next.
Unfortunately, I don't know where it's gone. So that's why it's called Beyond the Witches' Circle.
Amazing.
It's a love story. It's about social history. It's about shocking revelations about what happened in Victorian times. That's what it's about. This is later on in the book. Lizzie Jane decides that she must tell Henry that she's pregnant, and she does so on that bridge there which is the bridge over the railway at Blaydon, just near Blaydon Station. So that's a scene, a very important scene in the book where Lizzie Jane tells Henry in the pouring rain that he's going to be a father. And that, of course, is really bad news because neither of, they're not married. It's like history's repeating itself.
Yeah.
Henry's mum was in a similar situation, and they're determined not to let the same thing happen to them, kind of thing. Right at the end of the book, they end up in a pub, as we would now call it, called the New Inn, and this pub is a real place, and there it is in Blaydon, the New Inn, and it all reaches the story reaches its climax in that pub. And there is the New Inn, as actual people outside it, actual shots, a photograph of the New Inn, just at the turn of the century. And that's a little extract from the very end of the book, as you can see, set in the New Inn. And the reason I put that there is to get across this idea that throughout the book, every person, apart from 3 people, every place, everything is real. That's why I call it a historical novel.
And that must have been very difficult to write and have all that information in. If you're making it up, it's so much easier, I assume.
I mean, obviously, I don't know the words that were said, so I had to make up the dialogue.
Yeah.
Because I haven't got that, unless it's written down like it in those books I showed you. But, the dialogue between Henry and Lizzie Jane, and whether she told him on that bridge or not, I don't know. But that bridge exists. And she must have told him at some point, So that's how it is. I sort of think of it as like a framework of historical facts, thousands of historical reliable facts, around which I filled in the gaps with story. That's how it works.
Yeah.
And that's why it's called Beyond the Witch's Circle. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I've sold quite a few books, and also I've got quite a following up in the northeast, in Geordieland, where I'm an honorary Geordie almost. Anyway, because it's written where they live.
Yeah, you've brought something to life for them, haven't you?
Yeah, pretty popular.
That's fantastic.
If people want to get the book, the best place to get it from is from Horwich, from Sue Wright's shop, which is the Wright Reads on Windsor Hay Lane. Yeah. Just halfway down Windsor Hay Lane, when it opens at the end of the lockdown.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the best place to get it from. And also there's my other book, The King Cried for Coventry, which I mentioned earlier. But you can also get it online just by, the easiest way, to be honest, is just by putting Beyond the Witch's Circle into Google, and it just pops up. But you can also put bit.ly lowercase / Win Leighton with a capital W.
Yeah.
And that takes you to the page where it's available. You can get it as a Kindle, which only costs a couple of pounds, £2, I think, something like that. Or as a paperback, which is obviously a bit more.
Yes, yeah.
So, if people want to buy it, that'd be great.
Do you know, Matt, that was really, really interesting. Honestly, it was amazing. I feel like I've watched an episode of Who Do You Think You Are? It's absolutely fantastic, but better, a lot better.
Oh, thank you.
Because
it certainly kept me out of mischief for a while, researching it, I must say.
I mean, the history side of it is fantastic. Yeah.
I'm writing a sequel now, but I'm a bit stuck with it.
Oh.
So I will finish it, but it might take me a few years. It took me 2 years to write this one, and write and research it, and I'm about a year into the second one. So.
Well, I suppose it's having all that fantastic family history and then pulling it all together, and then obviously needing the knowledge of the area as well. There's a lot of work involved, isn't there, to then write it and make it, like you say, true to life.
To get the dates to lock together, because of course if I'm sticking to the accurate dates, and I can't just make them up. I had to use a massive spreadsheet working out, because the story takes place over different times. I had to work out how old people were at the different times and all the rest of it. And was it possible that they could ever do that? Because you can't have people meeting after one of them's died. This kind of thing.
No.
So it was tricky to get it all to knit together, but I managed it in the end.
Yeah. And I suppose you don't want your characters to die, do you? You know, you don't want to have to start with somebody new either, really.
No,
You know?
and I'm saying nothing about whether that happens or
not. I was going to say, is it a happy ending? Oh. So do you need to do some more trips over there for your second book?
I think for the second book, I'm allowing myself a little bit more license. I'm still sticking to a background of facts, but I'm reading a bit more of the narrative into it. So at the moment, I probably don't need to go up there, but we'll see. Depends how the book. What I am using is all the stuff, you can get it online, like the newspapers from the time. I take stories from the newspaper of the time and see if there's anything that might be interesting that I could weave into the story. So then if people say, oh, that's too far-fetched, that could never happen, I can say, well, yes, it did actually, because here's the newspaper article that I took the idea from, you know.
Because I think people, you know, we've got a short story competition going, and obviously 500 words is nothing compared to what you've written in your book, but people still always want to know where to get ideas from. You've given, as well as all the fantastic, you know, history and so on behind your book, you've given lots of ideas to people who might want to just pull something short out to write about, you know, because everybody will have something in the family history that they could write a very short.
Definitely.
You know,
and there are so many fantastic sources. There's so many. I mean, obviously there's the genealogical websites I use massively. Ancestry, Find My Past, Family Search, and they, you know, they'll give you not just who was born when and what they did, which is important, but also there's, you know, documents like, for example, if somebody's admitted to the workhouse, there's always a page of you know, information about their background and why they've had to come to the workhouse. Well, that's like gold dust, you know.
And also it's unique, isn't it? You know, it's not like you're just duplicating stories that, you know, are always the same books, same stories, aren't they? You've got something completely different.
And the maps, I mean, fantastic online maps. I use the ones from the National Library of Scotland. And you get maps, you know.
I'm going to write that down. That's handy to know.
It's just brilliant. I mean, if you're interested in where you live or where your parents live, just go to the National Library of Scotland, the mapping part of it. You can bring up old maps of wherever you want in the country.
Oh, I didn't know.
From Victorian times. Doesn't cost anything. You know, it's free. And you could really lose yourself in those. It's wonderful.
I bet, yeah.
And I use those massive. Oh, you saw, you know, and old books.
I was thinking as I was looking at them, because I've got felt like a really nice family history story, and it's the maps that I don't have, and I'm thinking, where's he got those maps from? No.
Oh, well, I mean, after this, you know, if you get stuck, if you can't find it, just give me an email, and I'll put you onto it.
I might have to
once you start, you won't stop. Believe me, because you can't leave it alone.
Well, it's been really, really good of you today, Mark, to give us all of that free lecture for a start. It's been absolutely fantastic, and all the information as well, and your efforts. I mean, I was enthralled all the way through. You know, I don't know how long we've been talking, but you know, I've just been really interested all the way through. It was fantastic. So thank you very much. Thank you. So if people, so I'll stop recording in a second. If people want to get hold of the book, they can Google, or they can go to the shop in Horwich, or like you said, it's available on Amazon and Kindle. So hopefully we'll get some good feedback about the book as well. And be nice, nice to know what other people think about it.
I mean, I don't really want to make money out of it. I just want people to read it. Actually, that's all I really want. You know, and it pleases me when people read it, and especially if they like it, which most people seem to. So that's good.
But we have a family history group at our centre in Falmouth who they really obviously anybody that's researching the family history is really involved, you know, and really into it. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to watch this and you know, enjoy it as well. So there'll be lots.
And if you know any other groups that, you know, are interested in this kind of thing, I'm happy to do what we've just done again. You know,
that's good to know. Yes. Brilliant, thank you. I'll start recording and just say goodbye to you properly without recording it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.